"Don't call me second brother," he said, his voice low and sharp. "I feel dirty hearing it from your mouth." That was the moment something inside me finally went quiet. Not loud, not broken, just quiet. Like a door closing in a long hallway where I'd been shouting for years, hoping someone might hear me. I stood there in the Vance family living room, my palms damp, my back straight the way my mother misses. Vance, I still called her, then had taught me to stand when I was being judged. The chandelier above us hummed softly, one bulb flickering like it couldn't decide whether to stay. "I didn't do it," I said. My voice sounded thin to my own ears. "Second brother, it wasn't me." Cameron didn't look at me. He looked past me, toward the staircase, where Brittany stood with her hand pressed delicately to her cheek. Eyes red-rimmed, lashes clumped together like she'd been crying for hours. She always cried beautifully. Even her tears knew how to behave. "She wouldn't lie," Cameron said. "Not Brittany." That was how it always went. Not Brittany. Never Brittany. The adopted daughter. The sweet one. The one who smiled at charity galas and baked cookies for the staff and called my parents mom and dad with a softness I'd never learned to fake. Richard Vance's voice came down on me like a hammer. "I always knew you were like this," he roared. "I shouldn't have taken you out from the slums." The word slums echoed longer than it should have. It filled my ears, crawled under my skin. I tasted metal at the back of my mouth and realized I'd bitten my tongue. "Get out of the Vance family," he shouted. In my previous life, that was where I collapsed, where I begged, where I cried so hard I couldn't breathe and promised to change into whatever shape they needed me to be. But this time I lifted my head. "You want me to apologize?" I said, surprising even myself with how steady I sounded. "Fine. I did hit Brittany. So what? In your eyes, I've been vicious for a long time." The room went still. Even the chandelier stopped humming. They stared at me like I'd spoken a foreign language. And maybe I had. Maybe this was the first time I'd ever spoken in my own. But that came later. That clarity. That cold, clean certainty. Before all of this, before accusations and betrayals and the way love can turn into a courtroom, I had tried very hard to live a normal life. When I first returned to the Vance family, I was 17. I remember the smell of the house before I remember their faces polish and lemon cleaner. Money rubbed into every surface until it shined. My room was bigger than the apartment I'd shared with the Sterlings, the couple who'd raised me since I was a baby. Back then, I thought the size of the room meant I'd finally arrived somewhere that wanted me. I was wrong, of course. But hope makes you stupid like that. Mornings at the Vance house were quiet in a formal way. Breakfast laid out by staff who moved like shadows. Richard Vance sat at the head of the table, newspaper folded just so. Eleanor Vance sipped tea and corrected my posture without looking at me. "Back straight, Skylar," she'd say. "You're Vance now." I tried. God knows I tried. I learned to eat slowly, to place my napkin on my lap, to say thank you even when my throat felt tight. I studied late into the night because I thought if my grades were perfect, maybe I would be too. Cameron and his older brother barely spoke to me unless it was necessary. When they did, it was with the careful politeness you reserve for a stranger who might disappear at any moment. Brittany, on the other hand, wrapped herself around the family like ivy. She laughed at Richard's jokes, even the ones that weren't funny. She brushed Eleanor's hair at night and called it bonding. She slipped her arm through mine in public and whispered, "I'm so glad you're back, sister," while her fingers dug just a little too hard into my skin. At first, I was grateful she was kind. Then I noticed how her kindness always had witnesses. The first time something felt off was small. Almost nothing. A bracelet went missing from Eleanor's jewelry box, a simple gold chain she rarely wore. Brittany gasped when it was mentioned, eyes wide, hand flying to her mouth. "Oh no," she said softly. "I saw Skylar near Mom's room yesterday. I thought she was just curious." Every eye turned to me. "I was dusting," I said quickly. "The housekeeper asked me to help." No one contradicted Brittany. The bracelet turned up later, tucked behind a velvet tray, and no one apologized. They just smiled at me like children do when they forgive a dog for making a mess. After that, the moments stacked up. Cash missing from a wallet, a broken vase, a harsh word Brittany swore I'd said when we were alone. Each time, I explained, each time, I watched belief slide away from me like water off glass. At night, I lay in my too big bed and stared at the ceiling, listening to the house settle. I missed the Sterlings, then their cramped living room. The way Mrs. Sterling hummed while she cooked, the smell of cheap soap and clean laundry. I told myself it was just homesickness, that once my family truly accepted me, the ache would go away. I didn't know I was already being replaced. I didn't know that love, when rationed, can make you beg for scraps. And I didn't know that one day, standing under that humming chandelier, accused and discarded, I would finally understand something simple and terrible. that wanting to be chosen can cost you your dignity. That was the beginning. After that morning with the missing bracelet, I learned how to live very carefully. Careful footsteps down marble hallways. Careful words at the breakfast table. Careful smiles that didn't show too much need. I watched Brittany the way you watch Weather Alert for shifts, for sudden storms, but I told myself I was imagining things. After all, she had lived here longer than I had. She knew the rhythms of the house, the soft places in people's hearts. I was the outsider, the girl brought back from a past everyone wanted to pretend didn't exist. Still, little things kept happening. A week after the bracelet incident, Richard's cufflinks went missing. They were nothing special, silver, engraved with the Vance crest, but he noticed immediately. He always noticed his things. The house went tense, like a held breath. Staff were questioned. Drawers were opened. And again, Brittany spoke up in that gentle, reluctant way of hers. "I don't want to accuse anyone," she said, eyes downcast. "But Skylar did ask about Dad's study yesterday. She said she'd never seen a room like that before." I felt heat crawl up my neck. "I was curious," I admitted. "I didn't touch anything." Richard looked at me for a long moment, his jaw tight. "Curiosity is one thing," he said. "Taking what isn't yours is another." The cufflinks turned up in his briefcase 2 days later. No apology, no acknowledgement. Just a quiet understanding that somehow, the house believed I was capable of this kind of thing. I started keeping to myself. I ate faster, spoke less. I stopped asking to help. I stopped trying to explain. The worst part wasn't the accusations. It was the way my brothers began to look at me, not with anger, but with disappointment. Like I was failing a test they'd already decided I couldn't pass. Cameron was the hardest. He was only 2 years older than me, close enough in age that I'd once hoped we might be friends. He had a crooked smile he rarely used around me, and a habit of tapping his fingers when he was thinking. Sometimes, late at night, I'd hear him practicing piano in the music room, the notes drifting up the stairs like a confession. I wanted to tell him things. About school, about how lost I felt, about how Brittany scared me in ways I couldn't explain. But every time I opened my mouth, Brittany was there leaning into him, laughing softly, her head tilted just right. She called him second brother, in a teasing voice, and he smiled like the world made sense again. When I tried it once, just once, he flinched. "Don't call me that," he said, not looking at me. "It sounds wrong when you say it." That was when I learned that words don't belong to everyone equally. The night everything truly cracked open was a Thursday. I remember because the housekeeper had made lentil soup, and the smell reminded me of the Sterling's kitchen. I ate slowly, savoring the warmth, trying to pretend I wasn't alone at a table full of people. Brittany came in late, holding her cheek. Her eyes were red, her breathing uneven. "What happened?" Eleanor asked, already rising from her chair. Brittany hesitated, then glanced at me. "It's nothing," she said. "I shouldn't say anything." Richard's gaze snapped to me. "Skylar," he said. "What did you do?" I froze. "Nothing," I said. "I've been here the whole time." "She got angry," Brittany whispered. "I only said she shouldn't go into Mom's room without asking. She just snapped." I stood up so fast my chair scraped loudly against the floor. "That's not true," I said. My heart hammered against my ribs. "I didn't touch you." Cameron finally looked at me then. His eyes were cold. "Why would she lie?" he asked. That question hung in the air, heavy and final. I tried to explain. I talked too fast, my words tumbling over each other. I told him about the missing things, about how every accusation seemed to come from Brittany, about how afraid I was of being misunderstood. Richard slammed his hand on the table. "Enough!" he shouted. "You think we don't see what you're doing? Playing the victim?" That was when he said it. The thing that burned itself into me. "I shouldn't have taken you out from the slums," he roared. "You can take the girl out of poverty, but you can't take the poverty out of the girl." Something in me broke then. Or maybe it healed. It's hard to tell, even now. I stopped crying. I stopped pleading. I looked at Brittany, really looked at her, and saw the faintest curve of satisfaction at the corner of her mouth. Just for a second. Just long enough. That was when the world shifted. Because in another life, one that felt like a bad dream I'd woken from sweating and shaking, I had knelt on this same floor, begging them to believe me. I had stayed after they threw me out, scraping together a living, watching Brittany from afar as she took everything that should have been mine. I had trusted her again, and she had killed me for it. Now, standing there, heart strangely calm, I knew something else. I didn't need their belief to survive. I did hit her, I said quietly. "So what?" The silence was deafening. "You've never believed me," I continued. "Not once. Since my return, whatever this adopted daughter says goes. So what right do you have to lecture me?" Eleanor gasped. Richard stared at me like he didn't recognize me. Cameron looked almost frightened. "I'm done," I said. I won't apologize for a crime you decided I committed before I ever opened my mouth. I went upstairs, packed my things into the suitcase I'd never fully unpacked, and walked out of the Vance mansion without looking back. The night air smelled like rain and freedom. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew who I was going back to. The Sterling house still had the same crooked mailbox. That was the first thing I noticed when the taxi dropped me off at the end of the street. The paint was chipped, the red flag permanently bent, like it had given up trying to stand straight years ago. The porch light flickered the way it always had, moths circling it like small, stubborn prayers. For a moment, I just stood there, with my suitcase, my breath fogging in the cool night air. My hands were shaking again now that the adrenaline had worn off. Leaving the Vance mansion hadn't hurt the way I thought it would. What hurt was the fear that maybe I didn't belong anywhere anymore. I rang the bell. It took all of 3 seconds. Mrs. Sterling opened the door in her slippers and housecoat, her hair wrapped in a faded scarf. She stared at me like she was looking at a ghost, and then her face crumpled. "Oh, baby," she said, and pulled me into her arms so tight my suitcase fell over. I buried my face in her shoulder. She smelled like soap and fried onions. Home. I didn't say anything at first. I just breathed and let myself be held, something I hadn't done in years. Mr. Sterling appeared behind her, his glasses sliding down his nose. When he saw me, his lips pressed together the way they did when he was holding back emotion. "You hungry?" he asked gruffly, already reaching for the kettle. That was how they loved quiet. Practical. Without conditions. I slept on the old couch that night, wrapped in a blanket that smelled faintly of laundry detergent and thyme. I didn't dream. For the first time in years, my mind was still. In the morning, Mrs. Sterling made eggs and toast. The edges burned just a little. We sat at the small table that wobbled if you leaned too hard on it. Sunlight came in through the thin curtains, dust motes dancing lazily. "You don't have to tell us anything," she said, pushing a plate toward me. "But if you want to, we're here." So I told them. Not everything, just enough. I told them I'd been accused of stealing, that I'd been asked to leave, that I didn't know what I was supposed to do next. Mr. Sterling listened without interrupting, his hands folded in front of him. When I finished, he nodded once. "You can stay as long as you want," he said. "This is your home." Something warm spread through my chest. It felt dangerous to hope again, but I let it happen anyway. A week passed. Then 2. I expected the Vance family to call, to demand explanations, to send someone to fetch me back like a lost item. They didn't. Instead, a thick envelope arrived in the mail. No return address. Inside was my college application paperwork withdrawal forms, already signed by Richard Vance. I stared at the pages for a long time, my hands numb. "They can't do that," Mrs. Sterling said, her voice sharp with anger. "You worked for those grades." "They did," I said quietly. "They always do." That night, I lay awake listening to the hum of the old refrigerator, feeling something settle inside me. A decision, maybe. Or a refusal. "I'll retake the entrance exams," I said the next morning. "I'll do it myself." Mr. Sterling studied me over his coffee. Then he smiled. "That's my girl." They helped me in ways I didn't expect. Mrs. Sterling quizzed me while she cooked. Mr. Sterling found old prep books and timed my practice tests. They never hovered, never pressured. They just believed. One evening, after dinner, Mr. Sterling cleared his throat. "There's something we should tell you," he said. Mrs. Sterling reached for my hand. "We didn't want to burden you," she said softly, "especially after everything you've been through." My stomach tightened. "What is it?" Mr. Sterling exhaled. "We're not struggling," he said carefully. "Financially." I blinked. "I know. You've always managed." He shook his head. "No. I mean, we've never been poor." The words didn't make sense at first. They floated in the air between us, waiting to land. "We chose a simple life," Mrs. Sterling said. "We wanted you to grow up kind, grounded, not spoiled by money." Mr. Sterling stood and walked to the hallway closet. He came back with a worn metal box, the kind you'd expect to hold old photos. Instead, it held documents, bank statements, property deeds, names I recognized from the business pages. My hands trembled as I flipped through them. "You're billionaires?" I whispered. Mrs. Sterling smiled sadly. "We didn't think it mattered. Not until now." I laughed then. A short, disbelieving sound. Tears followed, hot and unstoppable. All those years. The nights they'd turned off lights early. The vacations we'd never taken. The sacrifices I thought they'd made. They'd done it for me. "We can help you now," Mr. Sterling said. "If you want." I thought of the Vance mansion, the cold rooms, the way love had been rationed like currency. "I don't want revenge," I said slowly. "I just want to live well." They nodded. like they'd been waiting for that answer. I studied harder than I ever had. When the results came in, my score topped the list. The acceptance letter arrived on a rainy afternoon, the paper damp from my shaking hands. I cried into Mrs. Sterling's shoulder again. But this time, the tears were different. They tasted like relief. At orientation, I enrolled in jewelry design, a quiet dream I'd carried since I was a child, sketching rings in the margins of notebooks. My talent surprised even me. Professors took notice. Opportunities followed. I heard Brittany had enrolled in the same field. I smiled when I heard that, because this time, I wasn't afraid of her. I was finally standing in my own light. Success doesn't announce itself loudly at first. It arrives in small, almost forgettable moments, the way a professor pauses a second longer over your work, the way your name starts appearing in conversations you aren't part of. I noticed it in the studio, surrounded by the smell of metal polish and warm wax, the hum of tools filling the air. My fingers learned patience there. Precision. Jewelry design wasn't just about beauty. It was about restraint. Knowing when to stop. I threw myself into it the way I used to throw myself into trying to be a good daughter. The difference was, this time the effort fed me back. My first piece that caught attention was a simple pendant. No stones. Just silver shaped into an imperfect circle, textured with tiny marks like fingerprints. My professor held it up to the light and nodded. "It feels honest," she said. That word stayed with me. News travels fast in small worlds. When Brittany walked into the studio one afternoon, her heels clicking too loudly against the concrete floor, I knew she'd heard. She looked different, polished, confident, surrounded by two girls laughing a little too hard at something she'd said. She wore a bracelet I recognized instantly. One of mine, a design I'd posted online weeks earlier. My stomach tightened, but I didn't say anything. "Skylar," she said, her voice syrupy. "Fancy seeing you here." I smiled politely. "This is my program." She tilted her head. "Ours," she corrected. "Isn't it funny how similar our interests are?" I looked at her bracelet. "Very." Her smile faltered, just for a fraction of a second. From then on, it became a quiet competition. Brittany's designs were flashy, overworked, heavy with stones that tried too hard to impress. Mine were simpler. Clean lines, pieces that invited you closer instead of shouting. Buyers noticed. Invitations came in. Internships. A feature in a small design magazine. My name began circulating in ways Brittany couldn't control. I heard through classmates that she was furious, that she complained about favoritism, about my connections. Connections? I almost laughed. Meanwhile, the Vance family began to unravel without me there to absorb the blame. It started with Cameron. One afternoon, I received a message from an unknown number. "Is this Skylar?" It read. I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. "Yes, it's Cameron." My heart thudded, but my hands were steady. "What do you want?" There was a pause. Then, "I found your old phone." I sat down slowly. "What about it?" I typed. "There are videos," he wrote. "Recordings. From years ago." My throat went dry. I'd forgotten about those. Late nights in my room, whispering into my phone when I felt like I was disappearing, trying to document my own reality so I wouldn't lose it completely. "You never showed anyone," he continued. "You were just talking, crying, asking us to love you." I closed my eyes. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because," he replied. "Brittany lied. About everything." He called me that night. His voice sounded older, rougher. "She deleted things," he said. "Moved files. But she missed some. There's one. From the night of my accident." My chest tightened. "What accident?" There was a sharp inhale. "I thought Brittany pulled me out of the car," he said. "She told us she did. But the video shows you. You were shaking so badly you could barely hold the phone. You kept saying my name. I remembered that night now, the rain, the twisted metal, the blood on my hands. I dragged him out before the car caught fire. Brittany had arrived later, screaming, crying, taking credit. She told me not to tell anyone," Cameron said. "Said you'd panic, make things worse." I said nothing. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I was wrong about you." The apology landed softly. Too late to hurt. Too late to heal. Meanwhile, Mr. Sterling made a call. The Vance Group's latest investment, a series of mines in a flood-prone region, had been quietly hemorrhaging money. The risks had been hidden, the reports altered. It didn't take much for the truth to surface once the right people started looking. And then there was Brittany. I met her for the last time in a quiet cafe near campus. She'd called me, her voice frantic, asking to talk. She looked unwell, eyes darting, hands trembling. "You think you've won," she hissed. "You think you're better than me." I stirred my tea calmly. "I don't think about you at all." That broke something in her. I was never an orphan, she said, suddenly leaning in close. Did you know that? I didn't react. I'm his, she whispered. Richard's. His mistress's mistake. They brought me in to replace you. Because you were inconvenient. The words were sharp, meant to wound. Instead, they slid off me. Everyone's finding out, she said, laughing weakly. The business. The videos. They're turning on me. You did this to yourself, I said. Her eyes filled with something wild. You think Eleanor fell by accident? She asked softly. My blood went cold. I pushed her, Brittany said. Just a little. Down the stairs. She was getting suspicious. I reached into my bag and tapped my phone. The little red light blinked. Live. She realized too late. Sirens wailed outside the cafe minutes later. I watched as she was led away, screaming my name. It didn't scream back. I just breathed. The sound of sirens followed me home that night, even after the street fell quiet. I sat in my room at the Sterling house, the lamp casting a warm, steady circle of light over my desk. My phone buzzed non-stop messages, missed calls, notifications I didn't open. I turned it face down and rested my palms on the wood, grounding myself in the grain. The small scratches I'd made while studying. I wasn't shaking. That surprised me. In my other life, this was where fear would have swallowed me whole. Where I would have replayed Brittany's words again and again, wondering if I could have stopped her, wondering if somehow it was still my fault. But tonight, all I felt was a tired, settled clarity. The next morning, the story was everywhere. Brittany Vance arrested. Confession recorded during a live stream. Allegations of fraud and attempted murder. The headlines didn't bother to separate rumor from fact. They didn't need to. The video spoke for itself. Her voice, her face, the way she'd leaned in, thinking she was finally cornering me. Richard Vance released a statement by noon. It was stiff, legal, full of words like misunderstanding and family tragedy. He did not mention my name. By evening, the Vance Group's stock had begun to slide. Cameron came to the Sterling house 3 days later. Mrs. Sterling answered the door and glanced back at me. I nodded once. He looked thinner. His shoulders sagged like he'd been carrying something heavy for too long. I won't come in, he said quietly. I just needed to see you. We stood on the porch, the old boards creaking beneath our feet. I watched all the videos, he said. Everyone. You kept them even when we didn't deserve to be remembered kindly. I kept them so I wouldn't forget who I was, I said. He swallowed. Dad's under investigation. The mines. The falsified reports. Everything is falling apart. I nodded. I know. He hesitated. Brittany told us she was adopted. We never questioned it. I never questioned it. That was the problem, I said gently. He looked at me then. Really looked at me. Like he was trying to memorize my face. Is there any way? His voice trailed off. No, I said. Not unkindly. There isn't. He nodded. Like he'd expected that. When he turned to leave, he stopped. I'm glad you're alive, he said. So was I. Eleanor survived the fall. She didn't remember Brittany pushing her trauma as a way of rearranging memory, but the truth came out anyway. The house she'd curated so carefully was sold within months. The chandelier I'd once stood beneath was auctioned off to pay legal fees. The Vance family disappeared from public life. I didn't watch. I didn't need to. My life filled up instead. Design orders increased. A major brand reached out for a collaboration. At the signing, I wrote my name carefully at the bottom of the contract. Skylar Sterling. It felt right. One evening, after dinner, Mr. Sterling raised his glass. To our daughter, he said, who taught us that truth doesn't need permission. Mrs. Sterling smiled at me, her eyes shining. You were always enough, she said. I believed her. Sometimes, late at night, I think about the girl. I was the one standing in that living room, accused and discarded. I wish I could reach back and take her hand. Tell her she doesn't need to beg for a place at a table that was never meant to hold her. I didn't reclaim my life by pleading. I reclaimed it by leaving, by choosing the people who chose me, by standing still when lies tried to push me out of my own skin. That is what survival looks like when it finally softens into peace. These days, when the house is quiet and the evening light settles gently across the floor, I sometimes think about names. How easily they can be taken from you. How easily they can be returned. I was born Skylar Vance, raised as Skylar Sterling, and for a long time I thought I had to choose which version of myself deserved to exist. I thought blood decided worth. I thought endurance meant staying where you were hurt and calling it loyalty. I know better now. Family is not the place that claims you when it's convenient and discards you when you're difficult. Family is the place where you can sit at the table in silence and still be understood. Where love doesn't need proof. Where mistakes don't become lifelong verdicts. I didn't win by destroying anyone. I didn't rise by stepping on another woman's back. I simply stopped shrinking to make room for lies. And when I did that, when I chose truth over approval, everything else fell into place. If you're listening to my story tonight, and you're standing at the edge of a decision, if you're being asked to apologize for something you didn't do, to accept a role someone else wrote for you, to stay quiet so others can stay comfortable, please hear this. You are not wrong for wanting to be believed. You are not ungrateful for walking away from cruelty. And you are not weak for choosing peace over permission. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is leave the room where no one is listening. So I'll ask you, gently, the way Auntie May always does, if you were in my place, would you have stayed? Or would you have walked away? Tell me in the comments. And if this story spoke to you, stay with me. There are more truths worth telling.